Hi, welcome back to my channel. It's Christine Grace and welcome back to In Conversation with Christine. Guys, today I'm so excited because I have a very interesting figure. I'm joined today by David Sutcliffe. Some of you may know David from his previous acting career. He's been in the likes of Gilmore Girls and a few other things here and there. But if you're like me, you know David from his interviews, doing psychotherapy and all things psychology. You've probably seen him from his interview with Andrew Tate. I believe that was one of the first things that I personally saw of David. I think actually it was David's first interview of Andrew Tate, which was the first ever Andrew Tate content that I came across, which I'm sure we'll get into. So David, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you want to just give everyone a little intro to who you are and what you do?
Well, I mean, you said it. I used to be an actor for 20 years. I was an actor in Hollywood, best known for Gilmore Girls, which has become an incredibly popular television show through the years. And then I transitioned. I became very interested in therapy, just as a client, and then eventually found a kind of therapy, a somatic therapy called CoreEnergetics that I fell in love with and found it very impactful. And I started working with a teacher, and it was transformative for me on a personal level, but also just the technique of it, the philosophy. I don't know, I became fascinated by it, really drawn to it, and ended up going to her school, 4-year program, and then graduating, and then slowly made the transition from acting into what I do now, which is essentially psychotherapy. I do have a private practice here in Austin, Texas, but I also lead a lot of groups and workshops. Groups are really my specialty, and live group workshops and retreats. And obviously I do a lot of stuff online as well. And now I'm interviewing people from the psychotherapeutic lens, so trying to pry into their emotions, their history, and try to make the connection between things that maybe happened to them in their childhood and how that's affecting them today.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the first thing that I sort of saw of you and Andrew Tate was your first interview with him. And I'll be honest, because I'm really into psychology and especially psychotherapy, seeing Andrew Tate through that lens as the first piece of, sort of content that I really viewed of him, I found it really, really interesting. And I'm going to ask you some more questions about how that particular interview went down the line. But I just first want to pick up on this CoreEnergetics. Can you sort of highlight to me, because I've not heard of this before, what exactly is it? What's the methodology? How does it work? What's the philosophy behind it? And is this what you do in your private practice, or is this separate?
Yeah, CoreEnergetics is a somatic meaning of the body, psychotherapy. It was started by a guy named John Parakis, and it evolved out of the work of Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich was the first one to really understand and articulate that we have trauma stored in the body, which everybody kind of understands now, but he was really the first, and he started to work with people's bodies and help them release energy from the body. And that evolved into something called bioenergetics, which a lot of people have heard of. Bioenergetics was started by a guy named Alexander Lowen. And the same basic principle, he developed a series of different physical techniques and postures that would allow people to discharge their emotions without really dealing with the story, not talk therapy, but just feeling, like allowing the body to release the feeling, which is very common now. I mean, people do breath work and even yoga, and you can, be in a pigeon pose and for a long period of time, and emotions will start to come up. People will start to cry. And so it's really that philosophy, and it was very impactful. It works. And John Parakis evolved that work with the help of his wife, Eva Parakis. She had a series of channeled lectures called the Pathwork Lectures.
Okay.
Which I think is really one of the most underrated and unknown bodies of wisdom out there. It's a little tricky to read when you're first starting. But once you get into it, it's incredibly powerful. And of course, it's like all bodies of wisdom. It goes to one thing, that everything is one thing, essentially.
Yeah.
And that there's a unity consciousness, but there's infinite ways to look at that and dissect that, and also to think about the human consciousness and how it develops, and all the mechanisms that cause us to stay separate, essentially. And so John and Eva kind of merged their philosophies together, John coming from bioenergetics and Eva with this pathwork lecture, and they created CoreEnergetics. And at first, when you see it, it can seem a little weird, a little odd.
I was going to say there will be a lot of people watching this. Obviously, given that I work with Pearl, a lot of my audience is quite similar to hers, which is quite similar to Andrew Tate's, who will be hearing this and saying things like energies, like, what do you mean? I'm not sure if this comes into it. You're much more of an expert than me, but I've looked briefly at the work of, I don't know how you pronounce his name properly, I think it's Gilmore Girls, and he talks about trauma being stored in the body. And I watched a brilliant TED talk on they were looking at how it's the ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences, and how that links to health issues down the line. So is it that kind of similar thing when you say energies? Like, for example, are you talking about, I suffer with eczema, so I've looked a fair amount into what's the root cause of eczema, and doctors will tell you it's a skin issue, but actually when you go down the inflammation route, you see that a lot of it is stress. So when you say energies, can you kind of define exactly what it is that you mean?
Yeah, it can sound a little new agey, but we all think in terms of energy. I mean, somebody walks into a room and you say that guy has weird energy, or I really like her energy. So we're all attuned to energy, and we know that most of human communication is nonverbal. Right, that we're communicating with people through, and in some sense, through the vibrational field. And we know when we have good energy. Our bodies are energetic systems. They're essentially electric energetic systems. And so when our energy is flowing through us freely, when we're in that flow state, and we all know that, we feel alive, we feel connected, and we have access to a kind of knowing and wisdom. And sometimes we experience that in sports, or maybe you experience it when you're writing or you're creating art. Like, you just get in this flow state and things are coming out of you that you don't even know where they're coming from. There's some other intelligence that gets activated. And I think that we are energetically connected to everything, that there is an energetic field, and that we are an expression of that on some level. So what happens is, when we're children, we all experience a certain degree of trauma. So aspects of our energy, aspects which you might call our impulses or our life force or our desires or our longings or our needs, just the things that come through us, they are shamed, or they're rejected, or they're ignored, or they're put down. And so that is painful for a child. And because children's primary strategy is to stay in favor and connected with their caregivers, it's a priority for them to then repress the aspects of themselves that mommy and daddy don't like or don't want, or that prohibit the connection. And those become energetic patterns in the body. And you can see it in people's body. Like, if you really look at people's bodies, you can see that some people have a tight jaw, and maybe it's like, oh, they weren't allowed to speak up. Some people have really tight hips. Some people are tight across the chest or the back. And all of those can indicate where the child was, where they learn to suppress certain aspects of themselves. And so the work that I do is really helping people to liberate all the feelings that got held back. So maybe, the natural response to oppression is anger. Nobody likes to be oppressed. And you see that with children. Like, when you say no to a child, very often they'll throw a tantrum. They don't like it. They protest, which is understandable. And certainly parents need to, create space for all of that. But there's a lot of rage that we can have. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of fear that is locked in our bodies. So essentially the work that I'm doing is trying to release all of that energy, that emotion, that feeling, so that we can free up ourselves, so that we're just in that
make the
kind
space
of more
for
connected flow state all of the time, or more often than not.
It sounds really quite practical. in the sense of, if people are obviously finding some kind of release from this form of therapy, I guess my question is for people who are perhaps more cognitive, how do you intellectualize a type of therapy like this? Because it seems very sort of physical. I mean, have you ever
Here's how I sell it.
Pardon?
Here's how I sell it. Here's how I sell the work that I do. You intuitively know that it's good to feel your feelings, and that repressing your feelings is unhealthy. We all know that. That's it. There's we don't need to know anything more, right? It's like, do you want to feel your feelings? Do you know that it's healthy? You just intuitively know that. That's the work that I do. I'm going to create a space to help you feel your repressed feelings.
Right.
Now, people reject that because it's scary and they want to intellectualize it, but the intellectualization is just a defense.
Yeah.
So I don't give credence to the intellectualization. I understand it. I listen to it, but essentially it's a leap of faith, right? And so I try to keep it really simple, and people intuitively know that. So when people are exposed to my work, like I'm sure your audience right now, they're listening. And yes, there's the doubters, but if they're really listening and taking it in, everything I'm saying makes perfect sense. They already know this. Everybody already knows this, right? It's just that we're afraid to feel. Feeling is scary. Why is feeling scary? Because feeling is going to take us totally out of control.
Yeah.
You have to lose control. Right. But life is always out of control. It's an illusion that we're in control. Now, feelings and emotions and anger and energy out of control can be dangerous, certainly. But the times that we're most dangerous is when we're unconscious, right? When that rage or anger comes out, when it just is, it's an explosion, right? But if you understand and know yourself there, and you can contain yourself, right? Like you know and understand all of your vital life force, you're not going to be scared of anything coming through you. And so that's kind of how I think about it. It's just the more you can learn to feel everything inside you, the more free you are going to be. Because if you're afraid to feel things inside you, think about it. Mm-hmm. If I'm afraid to feel, right? If I'm afraid to be rejected, if I'm afraid to be hurt, if I'm afraid to get angry, if I'm afraid to experience fear, well, I'm going to avoid all kinds of situations in life so that those feelings don't come up inside me. So I'm robbing myself of so much life.
You're prohibiting yourself from
You're prohibiting yourself.
Anything.
Because if you're not afraid to feel, what are you afraid of?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm the kind of analogy that comes to mind for me. What I'm hearing, and this is just from my own sort of research, which all comes out of interest. I'm not qualified in anything, but I'm really interested in the psychology of Carl Jung and Freud. And what I'm hearing is very much about shadow integration. And, we have this part of us that has been completely repressed. And the danger is if you don't know that, well, then it can creep up on you and catch you anytime. And an analogy that I really like is the analogy of the wild horse. If you've got a wild horse in a tiny, tiny cage, the horse is going to be going nuts and freaking out and wanting to get out. But it's like, if you can make that cage a bit bigger, if you've got kind of a rope around the horse and you can let that horse kind of let it out and, really let out its frustration, then eventually you can rein the horse in, and after a point of time you can reach out and touch the horse and get to know the horse. And
that's right.
A tamed horse is obviously much better to deal with than a wild horse, and it seems like your work is providing that space for the horse to essentially have its moment, so then we can tame it. And I think unfortunately, we do live in a time at the moment where you're right. People don't want to feel things. It makes people vulnerable. It's so scary to feel. And that's what really interested me with your interview with Andrew Tate, because obviously his persona, I don't know the guy personally, but obviously his persona is very much, I don't feel things, or I do, but because I don't intellectually, cognitively see a benefit to it, I'm not going to feed it any energy, which I agree with that logic. I really do. And I do think in life moving forward, that can serve you really, really well. But I guess the question for me is perhaps not everyone has that same level of resilience. It works for him, but who's to say that's going to work for everyone else? Because for some other people, the feelings that they're refusing to feel could be very, very dangerous. Obviously, as far as we know, Andrew Tate, his shadow or whatever it is, hasn't done anything awful that we know of. But I just think there's something to discuss there with the whole idea of not feeling your feelings. So can you have you experienced anyone who has been really sort of skeptical with this kind of psychology? Obviously, Andrew Tate was someone. How often do you come across people who are
Well, the
skeptical of
interesting,
this?
yeah, lots of people are skeptical. I mean, the interesting thing about Andrew is that he is skeptical, and yet he sat down to have the interview with me. So how skeptical is he really? Like, there's
Twice.
some part of him that's open to it, right? And he wants to have the debate. He wants to have the challenge. And so I really appreciated it. And I actually felt Andrew was very open in our conversation and gave me a lot of openings and was extremely vulnerable. So and I appreciated that. And the point that I made to him, which I think really landed. He makes the point, like, I don't understand, you feel our feelings. It's like you're indulging in them and you're letting those feelings control you. And that's not really what it's about. It's acknowledging that you have feelings. I mean, you have feelings come up all the time, feelings of hurt, feelings of frustration, feelings of pain, feelings of fear, right? And my pitch to the skeptics is repressing those feelings, denying those feelings, rationalizing those feelings is not the best strategy. I understand that is a strategy and it can work, and it's certainly working in Andrew's case. But the argument that I made to him is you can allow those feelings to be there and without reacting to them. But you first have to let them exist and you have to acknowledge them. So the first thing that I do when I'm working with somebody is I'm just trying to get them to sit in the uncomfortable feeling, to acknowledge that it's there. They'll describe something that happened to them. And usually they're going to describe it, as a story. Well, this happened and my, girlfriend did this and and they're in the story of it. And what I'm trying to do is help them come into the feeling, like just what's the essence. And so I'll say things like, well, that must have been painful. That it sounds like you got hurt, or I can understand why you'd be angry. So I want to just sit them in the experience of the feeling, because that's actually the reality, right? And if they can come into the truth of like that, I had this emotional experience in this situation, and I can be with the feeling, right, of hurt or fear or anger, and I can just be with it because it's there. So I might as well presence it, because if you don't presence it, what you end up doing is suppressing it and then rationalizing. And in the place of rationalization or suppression, you actually can't judge your interpretation of reality. If you're suppressing your feelings, you can't trust your mind to draw an accurate conclusion about what's actually happening. Now, you could make the argument, as Andrew does, is I don't care about the truth. I only care about what's useful.
That's
right? Like
it, yeah.
me having an accurate representation of reality, it doesn't matter as long as my map of reality is effective in allowing me to get what I want. Then it's working for me. The argument that I would make, that I did make to him and I make to other people, it's like, yes, that's true. But the more present you are with what you're actually feeling and experiencing, the more effective your map is going to be. And I believe that to be true. The more present you are with what you're actually experiencing, the more in reality you are going to be. The clearer you're going to see what's actually happening. And so the more effective you are going to be able to be in navigating all of the challenges of life. And so it's ultimately about presence. What does trauma do for us? Right? Well, trauma, we get hurt, and then there's no place to experience the feelings of that. So we have to hold on to it. That's trauma, right? If we allow the pain to be released, or whatever the feelings are there, it's like, actually we won't carry that trauma. But it's the suppression of that. And so trauma, that holding back of feelings, creates distortions, and we create stories around it. I mean, how many times have you been sitting there listening to a girlfriend talk about what's going on with some guy she's dating, and you're thinking she's not in reality? Like, the story she's telling is from her perspective, and it just sounds a little bit off. Right. And what is she doing in that moment? Well, she's rationalizing her feelings, and maybe she's making him the bad guy, and maybe he was the bad guy, but maybe that she had something to do to participate in that she doesn't actually want to face. And maybe what's really going on is she's just hurt. She's disappointed, or she's scared that she's not enough for him, or something else is going underneath, but she's caught in the narrative. She's caught in the story. And if you're caught in the story, right, in the idea or the rationalization of it, you can't solve the problem from that place. right? The problem can only be solved internally, right? Within the self, if that makes sense. And so all I'm trying to do with people, I mean, at least the first step is just to get them to acknowledge like what's actually going on with them. And that's a fucking vulnerable thing to do. People do not like to admit that they're hurt. They don't like to admit that they're scared. And for some people, they don't want to admit that they're angry.
No, absolutely.
It's incredibly vulnerable.
I think that's definitely the first hurdle. I guess my line of thinking is probably going very similar to Andrew Tate's, which is, okay, so you're speaking in terms of energies and things like that, right? So to play devil's advocate here, you're creating the space to feel this energy, right? You've been brave enough to take the leap of faith to be vulnerable and to feel this really uncomfortable feeling, and it's horrible and you hate it, but you're doing it. If we're talking in terms of energy, well, if you add more energy to a fire, the fire's going to get bigger. So couldn't you then argue that by creating that space, you're almost creating a bigger space for that feeling to get bigger and grow? And a lot of the sort of skepticism and, you know, criticisms of therapy as a whole, which Andrew Tate says is, well, you're just creating space to whinge about problems. And if you whinge about problems, then they're going to get bigger because you're paying attention to them. So
I understand.
How do you sort of, what's the next step then? So you're feeling this feeling in this space. Well, how can you guarantee that you're then not giving it so much energy that it's going to grow?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that is a blind spot of a lot of therapy. And you can get caught in continuing to revisit the past, continuing to go back and talk about everything that happened to you. And you can get caught there almost as it's almost like a mental masturbation. It becomes self-obsession.
Yeah.
And it's actually its own defense, right? It's constantly revisiting the past is often a way that we can avoid moving forward.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can always point to something that's going on in our life and say, oh, this is about my mother, or this is what happened with my father. Like it's everywhere, right? And you need to go through that. The first thing that I try to do is just map people's reality, right? Like, this is what happened to you as a child. This is what it was like with your mother. This was like with your father, your siblings, whatever it was. And obviously people are going to be affected by cultural issues and religious issues and everything else. And that created a kind of a map of reality for you. And you can essentially do the math of the problem. Like you know, something got constructed, you know, some version of yourself and some version of the world. And now you go out and you project that onto the world and you are making manifest your reality through that blueprint that you have. People need to understand that first and foremost. They need to understand that they're actually creating their life from that place. That's a hard place for people to get to because we want to blame the external world for our problems. We don't want to take responsibility. And so that's the first step, right? But to get that to hold, you need to, I think, this is my experience, you need to go back and revisit the things that happened to you and resolve them. So if you have things that were unresolved from your past, right, and there's emotions and energy that is stuck in your body, right, what you want to do is complete the cycle. So the body knows how to heal. We know how to heal. Just like if you get a cut on your arm, the body, you don't have to do anything. The body will heal itself, right? I mean, you do have to give it air. And, you know, you have to wash it and take care of it. So there are things you have to do to help yourself heal, but the body will heal. And I believe emotionally we can do the same if we allow our bodies to do what they want to do. And that in some sense, it's not in my work or my workshops, I'm not imposing anything on anybody. What I'm actually doing is trying to give the person permission to just do whatever it is their body wants to do. And meaning, if you were oppressed as a child, right, or you were abused as a child, what I'm certain of is, well, one, there's definitely pain there, and there's probably a lot of fear, but there's definitely a lot of rage. Now, if you were abused as a child, you would naturally experience rage. You wouldn't like it, you know, but expressing that rage wouldn't feel safe, so you suppress it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I have somebody in the room, and I want them to be able to express the feelings that child wouldn't express, which is rage and anger, and maybe even a desire to kill, like to make it stop. Like, you might have fantasies about wanting to kill your oppressor. I think most of us do.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to, and that's what happens is, and what you see is it's actually in the body. It's not a concept. It's not an idea. And if you let the body just do what it wants to do, and it's in some sense complete the thing that it wanted to do but had to suppress, it will go all the way through it. So the rage will take you to your pain, which will take you to your fear, and you'll allow yourself to experience all of that, and something gets completed, and then it's done. And then you no longer carry it in the same way. It's not to say that you don't need to do maintenance or upkeep, or you don't need to be constantly updating your mental model, but something changes. And so I agree. I don't think it's healthy or good to keep revisiting a place. And I'll say something else. I also don't think it's good to just get in a room and scream and yell and cry. Like you hear about primal therapy, or you see these, documentaries on TV where people are just like, screaming around a room, and you're like, this looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
And in some sense, it is ridiculous. That's not the way I work. The way that I work is very contained, which is that there's a structure and a boundary to what we're doing. So it's intentional, right? Like it's not just like, and I don't let somebody go through a process unless I feel them grounded and present. Because if you go through this experience of feeling all of the things the child couldn't feel, but you're disassociated,
dangerous.
Nothing. It doesn't matter. Nothing happens. You've got to be here, present. So if I'm going to be,
you need to witness it.
You need to witness it. And then, even better is that you have other people witness you in that place, and then you can get reflection from them. Because what happens universally is when somebody goes there, like to the darkest places inside themselves, if they really go there and it's authentic, right? Of course, they're scared. We're all scared to show that part of ourselves. But what happens is that energy, right? Those emotions are like liberated, and it creates like life in the room. And you'll see like people will stand up, and then I'll ask like, oh, how did that feel to see this person go through that? And everybody's like, that was beautiful. That was amazing. That was so enlivening. That was so inspiring. And you can imagine to the person doing the work, that's a total mind fuck, right? They're thinking
almost
like, oh, I'm showing this part of me that wants to like strangle my father. And I and people are like, it's beautiful. Like, you know what I mean? But no, it's okay, the actual thing. But no, it's the energy, that the fact that you reclaimed that part of yourself, that you took something back. And so probably what's going to happen is when you get into relationship, you're probably not going to be unconsciously acting that out in some way with your partner, because you completed the thing with your father. So, which is really where it comes out, is mostly in relationships. So all of our mother-father stuff gets projected onto our partners. Yeah. And if you do this healing work, you're much less likely to do that.
No,
does that make sense?
That makes total sense, and I completely sort of agree. Especially when you mention about how it plays out in intimate relationships. Again, this is my nerdy psychology stuff coming into it, but that just makes me think of the idea of the archetypes of the anima and the animus, and they can get possessed by everything that you've kind of repressed way back there. And it's like, well, when something's repressed, it's unconscious. If you can't see it, well, like anything you can't see, that there's danger to that, because you don't know what's coming or when it's coming. With regards to the actual practice that you do, obviously you mentioned that it's like a wound healing. So someone will be feeling this feeling and then acting that out so that there's a resolution. And to clarify for the viewers, if I'm not interpreting you wrong, you mean a emotional feeling resolution rather than an intellectual, well, if I go back to my childhood and I reassess the story that happened, I can come up with a narrative ending. You mean actually like the body does what it needs to do to get that feeling out.
Yeah. And what'll happen is the narrative resolution will come from the resolution of the body. So when the energy is released, right, like you will then see things more clearly. You will understand what's happening more clearly.
You unlock certain things as well. I mean,
of course, it's unlocked in it's buried in your unconscious, and when it comes out through the body, all of a sudden you're like, I mean, the realizations, the big realizations I've had in the work that I've done haven't been from sitting across from a therapist and talking and going. I mean, occasionally you're like, oh, fuck, right, yeah. No, it's like I'm pounding on the block, or I'm kicking, or I'm doing some breath work thing, and like something is released from my body. And when that thing is released, that all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, right? Because you what is it? You've lost control, right? And it's the loss of control, the surrender to the body that allows the new awareness to come through. The two things are connected. So then the opposite is also true. Where we are blocked emotionally, we have cognitive distortions. And that's the important thing to know. And you said it earlier, you can't trust what you think. That's exactly right. In the place where you have suppressed emotions, it's 100% you're not seeing reality clearly.
Yeah. Well, it's like phobias. I mean, to speak from personal experience, I have an irrational fear, a phobia of needles, but specifically medical needles. So not tattoos, not piercings, specifically injections or blood tests. And I know it makes no sense. And it would be a bodily response. If I knew I had a blood test or an injection, my body would start shaking. I would start hyperventilating. I would be sweating. I'd get really hot. And quite often, more times than not, I would pass out. And I knew that didn't make sense. And through psychotherapy, I was able to unlock memories from before the age of 9 months old. And I was able to realize, so just to give you a little bit of background into a very long, complicated story. I'm adopted, and my birth mother, she suffered with borderline personality disorder, and she was sectioned whilst pregnant with me. So even in the womb, I was going through all sorts. I was born in the oldest mental institution in the world, and the feeling, when I dug into the feeling that I would get when I would go to have an injection or a blood test, I eventually was able to put it down to, well, it feels like my arms and legs go dead. And, I would sit there in that feeling, and what is that? And I very quickly realized that what I was feeling in my body was sedation. I then was found by someone from my past who confirmed that they saw with their own eyes. I saw my birth mother get sedated on multiple occasions do you know what's really weird is that Which
must have been extremely traumatizing for you.
I would have been under 9 months old. So I can't cognitively remember, but my body remembers. And what's really interesting is that I would say to my mum and dad, my adopted mum and dad, when I would say why I'm scared of needles, I would say to them as a kid, like 6 or 7, I would go, well, because I won't say her name, but I would see my birth mum get sedated, and everyone would kind of go to me like, you can't know. How you weren't even 1. You don't know that happened. But it obviously, someone from my past confirmed. All those years I was telling people I'm afraid of needles because I saw my real mum get sedated. And it sounded nuts, and I wasn't basing it off of any kind of visual memory, but through sitting with it and figuring out what it was that I was feeling. It's like some people will probably still be like, you can't know for sure, but it's like, I knew as a child, I knew what I saw. And even though as an adult, I can't physically see it, in my mind's eye, I can't see it. But I'll tell you what, since I figured out that that's where the fear was coming from, I've had blood tests and that since. There's still a bit there, can't lie. There's still a little bit where I'm like, I go a bit pale.
Yeah.
But the response now, the bodily response now, compared to what it was, is 95% compared to what it was.
That's amazing.
It's crazy, and it's so weird to think that I believe the brain stores everything. I believe that we do remember everything, but just a lot of it goes into the unconscious, and especially traumatic memories, because we repress them. And I think we live in a world now where people really don't want to discuss the fact that we do this. The fact that as children, we repress things. The fact that even as adults, we continue to do it, Think about when you're at work, that your boss says something that maybe triggers you or causes some kind of trauma. Well, you could lash out. You could try and kill them or whatever, like you were saying earlier, but you don't. So what do? You repress that emotion. And I don't think people realize that over a prolonged period of time, all those little repressions here and there, they're going to build up and they're going to grow into something. And I wanted to ask, what does that look like? When you unleash the beast, for lack of a better term, what does it look like? So you said that obviously you see some people on TV screaming and, completely out of control. And you mentioned that with your specific type of practice, they very much have to be grounded and present. Well, what does that physically look like?
Yeah, well, we have a big foam block that we use that's covered in fabric, and it has handles, and it's about, 3.5 feet by 4 feet, cube. And then we have a bataka, which is like a bat, and it's a little bit heavy, like an axe handle. And that's usually where we start. And we have people sort of bring the bat down on the block, almost samurai style. And the reason for that is, and that's a classic bioenergetics exercise, is that we hold a lot of tension across the back of our shoulders. Like if you think about holding back your anger, like you kind of tense across here, right? Like you feel anger come up and you're afraid, you kind of hold it here, right? Like that. And that pattern can become habitual, and it's just almost like how we are. So the hitting really helps us release the anger. Like if you hit and you make a sound, something's going to come out of you, and it will take you out of control. But it's not necessarily just anger. Sometimes we're just hitting to claim our life force. Like sometimes if somebody is really shy or they're reserved, sometimes I'll have them come up and just hit and look at the room and just say, like, I'm here.
So this is in front of other people?
Hear my voice. In front of the whole room,
At an audience.
I'm here. Well, I mean, it's not an audience in the sense of we've all are there for the workshop.
Yeah.
So
but it's a group setting.
Group setting is the best. Yeah.
Why
because
do you think that is?
Because as I said earlier, it's very impactful to be witnessed by other people, right? So we have a story about what's going to happen if I express all of these feelings inside me that I'm scared to express. The reason why do we hold back feelings? Well, because we're afraid to express them. What other reason could there be? We have an idea that if I express this aspect of myself, if I show this part of myself, like I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be annexed in some way. I'm going to lose the connection. And so we hold back in some sense, to stay in connection with people, to be proper, so that people will like us, and that's a deep inherent thing, not just, as I said earlier, from childhood, because we have a desire to stay connected in favor with our caregiver, but also with the tribe, right? Like we all want to go along to get along. It's we want to be with the tribe. So often we will sacrifice aspects of our feelings or our truth so that we can stay in connection with other people. It's just what we do. So we have ideas about all of us have, if I bring myself out all the way, if I say everything that I think, if I express everything, something bad is going to happen. Most of us have some version of that idea. And what happens is if you go up there and you hit and you express yourself authentically and you're really, connected and present, the opposite effect happens. It creates connection. Because of course, authenticity creates connection. Yeah. And even if what you're saying is ugly, like I hate, like I'll have people go up there, they'll have hatred. So just go up there and express the part of you that like feels hatred. So maybe you just hit and you say, I fucking hate. And maybe there's somebody specific that you hate and you can say that. But if you really let yourself go there and you're present in the experience of it, it's actually, like I said, it's very enlivening, and it gives permission for other people to feel the same, right? Because we all have hatred, right? We all have judgment. We all have shadow emotions. There's zero people walking around that haven't had a moment that of like, I could fucking kill. Like, you know what I mean? Like we've all had it. And maybe it's totally irrational, but it's just like, I could kill right now. And we usually shame these aspects of ourselves. We make them bad, we make them wrong. And I understand why we do that. But when we claim them, when we own them as part of our humanity, and we do that in a way that's conscious and present, what actually happens is that we make ourselves more safe for ourselves and for other people. So if you and I are in a relationship, right? There's a monster in you and there's a monster in me.
Yeah.
Okay. And, put to the test, you could probably do like incredibly cruel things to me, and I could probably do incredibly cruel things to you.
Yeah.
Now, when those things are hidden, you're hiding them, or if I'm hiding them and we're pretending they're not there, and I'm just like, no, I'm a really nice guy. Well, we know that that's not true on some level. So it doesn't feel entirely safe. But if you can see, if in other words, if I can know the monster in me, and if I'm at peace with the monster in me, if I've made contact, if I have awareness and I have no shame about the monster that's in me, I'm much less likely to act out unconsciously from the place of my monster. So knowing our darkness actually makes us safer for ourselves and for other people. If, I want to know in relationship with anybody, right? Romantic relationship or otherwise, I want to know the monster in them because I know it's coming out eventually.
Of course.
Because relationships are hard.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, just own it. It's okay. Right. And no shame. And the more that we own it, as I said, the less likely we are to act on it. And so that's what happens in groups, right? These beliefs that we have about letting ourselves be seen, that it's dangerous, or I'm going to be rejected, or it's somehow wrong or bad. Those beliefs get challenged because what happens is people love to see us all the way fully expressed. That's why we go see movies and actors. We love it when our favorite actor is the bad guy, and it's amazing. And, they're doing all this crazy stuff. It's like, it's amazing to watch because they've given themselves permission to go there.
Yeah.
And there's something liberating about that. And so that's a big part of what I'm trying to do in the workshop, is really to help people connect with and understand what we call the lower self, but Jung would call the shadow.
What do you do in terms of diagnostics? So the people who come to you, are they referred from doctors? Are they people who come to you who've been diagnosed with specific disorders? Are they more just people who acknowledge that they have traumas?
It's a good question. It's just people who are drawn to my work specifically, or CoreEnergetics work in general. It's not for everybody. It's certainly not for people, for instance, who have like borderline, like they don't have enough of an ego structure or enough grounding to really be able to do this work. So
that's exactly why I asked, because obviously I'm interested in borderline given my circumstances.
Yeah.
Because the way you're obviously describing everything, and the model of the shadow and everything, I guess I want to know what your kind of opinion is on these sort of cluster B type personality disorders, where it almost seems that, at least in my interpretation, again, guys, this is not a qualified interpretation whatsoever, but from what I know, in my interpretation, it almost seems that somewhere along the line they have repressed so much of themselves that it's almost like they've locked a door and they've thrown away the key and they don't know where they've put the key. And now they can't even see the door anymore. How do you explain things like that? And is there a way out of that, in your opinion?
I think there's a way out of most every place. I mean, I think, listen, people experience unspeakable trauma. It's shocking. I mean, the things that I hear, right? And we know that. We don't like to look at it. We don't like to face it. But the level of abuse towards children is just, it's unbelievable. And I think what happens, especially for instance, borderline, and there's a lot of ways to talk about borderline, but it's just in a general way, the trauma they experience usually happens or begins at a very young age. And it completely fractures them, meaning like they're shattered internally. Like there's nothing they can hang on to. There's no place to go for safety. And so there's no way that they can be organized inside themselves. And so all they're ever trying to do is survive.
Yeah.
They're just perpetually stuck in survival mode. And they have a very hard time really seeing reality clearly, right? Because they're stuck in survival mode and they don't trust anything. That is like a hell realm to live in.
Yeah.
And so somebody like that needs very gentle care. Like they have to just learn to come back into their body. They're disassociated in such an intense way that just to bring them into their body can take a long time. And so they need something different than what it is that I offer. That people who come to me, as I said, they have to be enough in their body, and have enough of an ego structure that they can actually, do the work, because, and so we screen. We have a very careful screening process for who we allow in, because if somebody comes in like a borderline and starts to hit and scream and yell, if they can't stay present, if they can't contain it in their body, I think it does harm to them. I don't think that's what they need. So yes, I don't think it's good for certain people, like certain character structures, let's say, with certain personality disorders, to do the work the way that I do it, or the way that CoreEnergetics does it. I think they need something more, more like a somatic experience, which is much more gentle. It's like, I'm just going to come into my body, I'm just going to breathe, I'm going to feel my heart, or I'm going to feel my stomach, and you're just starting to make contact with the body, right? And that can take a long time. For them to really feel safe to come back into their body. Because if you think about it, if you were abused as a child, what would you do? Well, you'd leave your body.
Yeah.
Because it's not safe to be in your body, right? And so to invite them back into their body, there's a part of them that's like, fuck that. I'm not coming back into my body. It's not safe in my body.
Yeah.
So it can take a long time to bring them back into the body. And what do I mean when I say in the body? Well, we all know what that means, right? To live in our bodies, because you hear that a lot. It's like, he's not in his body, or, be in your body. But the feeling of like being connected and alive in your body. It's a feeling and sensation. But very often we are disconnected from our bodies. And so I like to think, when you see a lion out in the plain, it's like they're in their body. And there's a beauty to it. They're not in their head. They're not thinking. They're existing. They're alive. They're present. And so in order to be fully present, we have to be all the way in our bodies. But the issue is, if I'm in my body, then I have to feel.
Yeah. And that's scary.
And and that's scary. And so there's a lot of resistance to doing that. So if people don't have the ability, some degree, like we all leave our bodies, and so it's not that the expectation is that everybody comes to my workshop has to be 100% in their body all the time. That's obviously unrealistic, but they have to have enough of a capacity to stay there.
And how do you screen for something like that? How do you screen for how in their body someone is?
You get, over time, you develop a kind of a skill or a knowing. I mean, I can see it almost instantly, to be honest. Like it within a minute, I can sense it.
When you say sense, are there physical manifestations that you can pick up on? And what does that kind of look like? If someone's not in their body, what are things that you tend to notice about their physical manifestation? An interesting question, actually, that's just popped to my mind that I want to ask is, do you notice anything like physically wrong with them, like maybe their health? Do you see those kind of links?
Can be. They can. I mean, a lot of people can have chronic health patterns. It can manifest in infinite ways. So there's no like one thing.
Okay.
Like if they have this disease or this ailment, it means this. But very often, if you have a lot of suppressed emotion, it will manifest as chronic health problems. That was true for me. I mean, I had back pain for since I was like 17, and now it's gone, which is kind of crazy. I had it all my life, but once I healed emotionally, it sort of magically went away, which is amazing. What am I looking for? What do I see? Well, it's hard to describe. It's like it's almost at this point, it's like asking like a musician to describe how they make music, because it's an abstract thing, but it's just a feeling that you get. Because the way that I work, I mean, I have a cognitive place where and that's what we're doing right now. I'm understanding all these concepts. I'm talking about it. But really what I'm doing when I'm working is I'm attuning to somebody's body, like attuning to their energetic field, let's say, right? And if I attune to their energetic field, like you're communicating with me. Like even right now, like if I tune to your energetic field, like I can pick up all kinds of information, right? And you have to be willing to sort of open up to me. There has to be an agreement. I don't just like tune in without consent.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, because it is kind of a violation. Like there has to be an agreement, right?
Yeah.
But obviously when I'm interviewing somebody, that agreement is in place, and you just start to pick up. You can just feel it. You can sense it. And
are there any sort of red flags to be like, oh, this person's really not in their body, so therefore perhaps my practice isn't the way.
If they're perpetually in the story, so they talk a lot. Like talking is a way that we avoid feeling often.
Yep.
And so we can talk and we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, right? And explain. And if I try to slow them down and ask them like a question, or, if they can't stay present, to be, if they can't be with me to some degree, like connect, like right now you're with me. I feel you listening. I don't feel like you're waiting to speak. I feel like you're taking in what I'm saying, and then, and then something else will come. So it's like, okay, I feel you. I trust you. You're there. But very often you might not, like, you can feel when somebody's not there.
Yeah.
Like they're not there.
Well, that's how you describe it, isn't it? You kind of say, oh, they're not all there. Yeah.
They're not all there. Exactly. Yeah. And you just pick up on that. And if somebody's not all there, and which is fine, people are nervous in interviews and different things like that. But if they can't come into the present, if they can't come back to a certain degree, the work is probably not right for them. And so, the talking, the looping, the replaying of a story over and over and over again, perpetually seeing that they are a victim, that everything that's happening to them is because of some external circumstance, and they take no responsibility or don't even want to look at that they might have a part to play in that.
Yeah.
That probably our workshop is not for them, because really the foundation of our work is self-responsibility. I mean, certainly when we were children, we were victims, and that's real, and that happened to us, and it's unfair and it's painful. But as adults, we have to take responsibility for our reality. That's the only way out.
I actually have quite a controversial take on therapy when it comes to that, and I'm intrigued to know whether you agree. I've heard people like Andrew Tate, even Pearl, say many a times that therapy is useless. And my view, obviously given my circumstances, I'm gonna have a bit of a different view. Cognitively, intellectually, as the adult that I sit here as today, I absolutely agree with Pearl and Andrew Tate, because I do understand the whole philosophy of, sitting in your emotions can be a bit useless sometimes. However, my view is that therapy is beneficial only so far as you're willing to take accountability for it. So here in the UK, you can get counselling therapy on the NHS, so you can get it for free. And I don't see that as beneficial, because it allows for that victim mentality, sitting in your feelings for too long and just whinging and whining about it for ages, never really coming to any kind of problem. I think unless you've been sectioned, so unless it's very clear that someone's not all there, they're not in their body, they're a danger to themselves or society, in the UK, I believe that you should have to pay for mental health, because I actually think that does something to the mind when you know that, oh, I'm investing in this. This is actually a service.
Right.
Because at least then at that point, it's like, for example, your workshop. I'll be honest, maybe there's some stuff I got to deal with. I can't think of anything worse than doing all of that in a room full of people. And I'm aware of my shadows. So that's why I'm saying perhaps that's something I need to work on. But going into it, if I knew I was paying for it, best believe that would give me the kick up the backside to at least try and give it a go. And I think therapy only works with that level of awareness and accountability. So it sounds like what you're doing is along a similar line. I'm just intrigued to know, if you were in the UK, I know it's different out where you are, but do you think mental health help should be free?
I think that there are people that are so heavily traumatized and so incapacitated. I think that it would be good for society to have a place for them to go and get help. But in general, I agree philosophically with what you're saying. I think if you really want to do the work, you have to pay.
Yeah.
You have to be incentivized.
It holds
you have
you
to make that contract.
Because,
and here's why, because it's scary. And there's a part of us that, as you just said, there's nothing that sounds worse than coming to your workshop and going there and doing all of that. Of course, there's an aspect of us that doesn't want to feel anything. That is going to say no, right? That's a protective mechanism. That's what we call the lower self. And so in order to push past that part of us that is saying no, we have to create some leverage for ourselves. And that the leverage is the money that we pay,
absolutely.
Right? Once I put down my $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it is, it's like, now I got to go do this thing. And I don't want to do it. It's going to be scary.
But I've paid for it.
but I paid for it, so now I have to go. And so, yeah, no, it's you have to create that leverage. And that's how I did it. I would just sign up for stuff. And then it's like, okay, now I got to deal with this. It's like, I knew this would be good for me. And then I signed up and now I'm committed. And that created the leverage for me. I couldn't really back out. And now I got to go do this thing. And very often I would show up like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I think these people are fucking weird. Well, I'm not, my mind would create all kinds of rationales and excuses, right? But always at the end, I would get something really powerful out of it. And so, I think about Sweat Lodge, I do Sweat Lodge, which is a Native American ceremony where you get in this little lodge. It's kind of like an igloo, but it's covered in canvas, and they bring very hot rocks into this lodge, and they pour water on them, and then it gets extremely hot in there, like hotter than any sauna you've ever been in. And they're playing a drum and they're singing songs, and it's pitch black, and it's packed in there tight.
Oh my gosh.
Pitch black. And it can be quite uncomfortable. Like you're very often.
Well, I'm glad you're not saying that you love it, because I'd be concerned you're a masochist at that point.
No, I do love it. Now I love it. But the beauty of the ceremony, the perfection of this ceremony is that you can't really get out. So you're in this situation, and there's a lot of discomfort can come up. Either you get scared because of the dark, or because it's so hot, or because you're cramped in, whatever it is. And there's a part of you that's like, I got to get the fuck out of here. And you can start to have a panic attack, but there's no way out. So you got to deal with it. And you know what happens? You find out you can deal with it.
Yeah. And that must be really
empowering. And that gives you this power and strength. And so it's like, it's in some sense, the ceremony is cruel, right? Because it's like you're forced to deal with your terror, but actually it's quite compassionate, because on the other side of your terror, you come out of there and you realize, like, I'm stronger than I thought.
I did that. Yeah.
Like I'm super happy that I got through that. Oh, I can get through that. What else can I get through?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like what I said earlier about the blood test thing. Whenever I would do these blood tests or injections, I would have this whole response beforehand. Nightmare. My mum used to get so embarrassed taking me to the hospital. But afterwards, I would go into like a shock mode, and I would break down crying, and I would just constantly say on repeat, I can't believe I did that. And it's like I was almost so like overwhelmed with myself for completing it. And it's interesting when you talk about things like that. And I know that obviously people like Wim Hof have become really popular recently, because it's that similar kind of thing. It's putting the body under stress and just realizing what you're capable of. Well, it's just kind of interesting, because that message does actually completely correlate with the whole manosphere space and, people like Andrew Tate, because they say a similar thing, go out, go to the gym, work hard, put yourself through shit in order to come out and realize what you're worth. So I find it interesting when seemingly two conflicting messages tend to have these harmonies where there's crossover, and it's quite a similar philosophy sometimes.
Well, I would argue that my workshops are scary. That's why people don't want to come. And that's why they'll talk down therapy. I'm like,
try it.
I don't need therapy. I don't need this. I'm like, well, why don't you come there, bro, and check it out and see how it is? Why don't you want to come? Well, it's this. No, you're fucking scared. That's why you don't want to come. And that's fine. It's fine. I was terrified of coming to these workshops, but that's, I think, a lot. Listen, there's a lot of legitimate criticisms about therapy. And I think a lot of therapy can be indulgent. I think it's just like anything. There's a lot of great therapists. There's a lot of not so great therapists, right? And so people's judgments and criticisms of therapy, fair enough. But I think a lot of the reason that people don't want to go to therapy is because they're afraid. They're afraid to find out what's going on inside them. They're afraid to unravel this, self that they've become attached to, that they know, that they feel in control of. Mm-hmm. We have an intuitive sense that there's something else inside us. And listen, for a lot of people, maybe they don't have the time or the energy or the resources to really go all the way through it. I mean, I made that my life's work. I mean, I was an actor. I made a lot of money as an actor. And then all of a sudden I had all this time and space where I could do whatever I wanted.
Yeah,
Well, what
yeah,
I
yeah.
chose to do was all this therapy. And then I went, now not everybody's going to do that. That's why I teach it now, because I went all the way through it, dedicated an incredible amount of time, and I allowed myself to completely unravel.
How much time did
And
that
was
take, by the way?
What's that?
From leaving acting to, going through your own therapeutic process to then obviously becoming a teacher, practice, psychologist, therapist, whatever facilitator, as you call yourself.
Facilitator, yeah.
How long was that process? How long did you do your own sort of therapy?
I started therapy at 27. I found CoreEnergetics at 31. And at right about 29, I really had hit success as an actor. And then I got serious about this therapy at 35. I started, I went to a week-long workshop up at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. And that's where I met this woman, Ann Bradney. And that's where I really what the hell what is going on here? That's where I became fascinated. I mean, she was really a master, and I just wanted to understand what she was doing. And shortly thereafter, I enrolled in her school, and that was a 4-year program. And I think I came out of it when I was in my early 40s. And then I went to Toronto to shoot a TV series. I was still working as an actor, but TV series, they shoot 4-6 months a year. So I had the other 6 months to do whatever I wanted. And so I got a studio and I started running workshops just to, see. And what happened is people started saying, hey, you're really good at this. And then I think this is what you're supposed to be doing. And so that was sort of the beginning of leaving the acting behind and getting into this work. But it was a difficult transition, of course, because my whole identity was wrapped up in being an actor. That's how I'd made my money.
Yeah.
Hollywood can be a very fun place.
Yeah.
And all my friends, and there was it's exciting, right? But it's also, I part of me, I think, outgrew it. And, I just was following what I loved, what I was interested in. And at a certain point, this work felt more alive, more resonant, more interesting to me than the acting. And so I just ultimately made that transition. And of course I thought, my fame that I have as an actor, that's really going to help me. At least, people will know who I am. But I actually think it's had the opposite effect, or at least originally, because people are like, oh, he just quit acting and now he's a life coach. And it's and I realized, from their perspective, it's it seems like an odd choice to make. And I can understand why people might not. How could they know how seriously I took it and the work that I did? I mean, 4 or 5 year training program, all kinds of workshops. I mean, it was just, I was all in for about 7-8 years. I mean, that was my whole life. And I was fascinated. I was fixated on it. So, but now I think as I put myself out there more, whether it's interviews, or Instagram, and the more people that come to my workshop, people are starting to see, oh, okay, this isn't just some fucking former actor who's, trying to be a therapist. This guy's actually really committed to his work and is good at it.
No, that's amazing. And I think you've absolutely, you've got to follow where the passion is. I mean, you spoke at the start of the interview about the flow state, and it seems like you found that flow state. So only good things can come from that for you, and obviously hopefully the people who come to your workshops as well. Your whole basis of your practice is psychotherapy, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to briefly ask you, because we spoke about not all forms of therapy being beneficial for people and a lot of it being self-indulgent. What's your opinion of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? Do you think it's any good? Because my personal opinion is it's rubbish. I think it's just so silly. Like, the way I see it is kind of like, to use my eczema analogy, it's just like putting steroid cream on. It's going to get rid of it. You're not going to see it, But best believe that eczema's going to come back in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's going to come back worse.
Right. Well, obviously I have a bias because the whole foundation of the work that I do is to get to the deep emotional root of the issue. And if you do that, that will solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That said, from what I know of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I don't know a lot. I mean, I've read a bit about it. I mean, I read a textbook just to kind of get a sense of what it was. I think there are things about it that are useful. I think there are skills and practices that are useful for people. And I think that not everybody is going to come to one of my workshops or some other workshop or do the kind of deep therapy.
But then I would argue that's pointless then. If you're just going to treat the wound.
Maybe. Well, I mean,
argue,
people need. I hear you, and I guess I'm being generous and just like people need coping mechanisms, and there are things. I mean, I think there are things in cognitive behavioral therapy that I do think are useful, and if they make your life better, right, and their practices, I think it's helpful. Again, I have my own bias, but there is something to be. I mean, there's something to be said for practices and techniques that just have utility. And if they work, they work, right? So if there was a way that for you to be able to get needles that didn't involve you, because maybe, I don't know, it's a crazy thing that you remembered that, right? Most people are not going to remember that or make that association. So if there was some kind of technique that would allow you to get needles without being afraid, some way of thinking, some little trick, well, okay, sure. You're not getting to the root cause of it. And so maybe it's going to be made manifest in some other area, and it probably will.
That's my whole issue. Because
right.
I'm like, well,
but at least you're able to get the shot.
That's it. That's true. But there's what's that famous bridge? There was a bridge that like was stood for quite a few years and it worked, and then all of a sudden it fell down. It's like, well, a bridge can work and it can work great as a great bridge, and everyone knows the bridge, but then it's like 10 years down the line, if the foundations are dodgy, the whole bridge is going to collapse. So that's my whole,
I'm with you.
I'm very much all in. I'm like, if you're going to do it, you got to go all the way. Like, you can't just scrape away at the surface and hope for the best. Like, no, you got to chuck yourself into the abyss and pray that you come out with some gold.
Well, I like your style, and I'm trying to be fair-minded here in the podcast, but yeah, generally my attitude is more where you sit, which is like, you got to go all the way. You got to go fucking deep, or what's the fucking point?
Yeah.
The problem with that is, I'm fucking hardcore, right? Like I had to realize not everybody's hardcore like me.
No, I think I probably need to realize the same thing.
And I have to kind of give people a little bit of grace, because I'm one thing after another. Like I feel like the therapy that I did was like the most intense kind of therapy with the most intense teacher. And then I got into, 4 years of plant medicine, ayahuasca in the Shipibo tradition.
Have you done ayahuasca?
A lot of ayahuasca.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind talking about that experience briefly? Was there a sort of pivotal moment in that? I just want to know your kind of top takeaways from that experience, because that's an area with my channel. When I started my channel, 3 things I'm really interested in is physics, psychology, and psychedelics. And philosophy. All P's. Don't know what the correlation is there, but anyway. So your psychedelic experiences, what's your main sort of takeaways? Because some people are kind of like, oh, well, that stuff is just druggies and they're just, off their nut. They don't really know what they're on about. But then there's a lot of people and a lot of research now coming out that shows, the experiences people have in these realms, perhaps psychological states, who knows, they, at least to the person, feel very real. So what was your personal experience?
I mean, I think it's complicated. I think everything gets co-opted in a way, and it's easy to delude yourself. But at the core, I think ayahuasca, psilocybin, those are the 2 that I'm familiar with. Mostly ayahuasca. They're very, very powerful tools for self-exploration. I mean, they reveal things. They take you out of control. I mean, they take you out of your ordinary state and take you somewhere else. And that, I think, is a very useful thing. to get you out of that construct that you live in and show you that there's more to the world. There's more to your perspective, and there are things about yourself that you don't understand, and that the world and life is a lot bigger than just your own ego and how you see it. That there's other things going on. And I found my experiences incredibly humbling, very often challenging, terrifying, mostly because, when the medicine comes on, the effect, it can be uncomfortable because you feel like something else has control over you.
Yeah.
You are no longer in control. Whatever this thing is now has control. And if you resist it, it just makes it worse. And so the mantra is just, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. You have to learn to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when you surrender to the medicine and surrender to the experience that you can sort of navigate it with some kind of, I don't want to say peace, but, navigate it with you can navigate it. Let's just say that. And I think that's an important lesson that you can take out into your life. Like, where am I resisting life, right? Because where I resist, I suffer.
Yeah.
And can I just be with life? And can I surrender to everything? Which is why that mantra, yes, thank you, which the mantra got me through a lot of difficult, very challenging ayahuasca ceremonies when I thought that I was going to go insane.
Can you describe what that felt like?
Yes, thank you.
When things became difficult, what's that experience like when you say you think you're going to go insane?
Well, there's a physical feeling of unease, like you can often feel physically ill. And it's hard to describe. It's like your reality becomes completely fragmented. And really what's happening is that some part of your ego is dissolving or is being challenged, right? And the ego really is about control, right? And it's our sense of identity. And what ayahuasca is showing you is that's all an illusion. The ego is really an illusion. It's a construct, and it's a useful one, and we need it. But when we're attached to it, we're not identified with it, we're not aware that it is a construct. That's where we can have a lot of suffering. And so it's sort of detaching you from the ego self, which can be a terrifying experience. So for me, there was often a lot of mental chatter in my mind of really just terror and like, oh my God, this medicine is making me crazy. The people who are hosting this ceremony are satanic. These chants are programming me to make me some alien slave. I mean, your mind goes to crazy places, right? And you have to just let go. And in some way, you understand why your mind goes to those places, because the mind, the ego, is making an enemy out of the thing that is confronting it.
Yeah.
And that's the story that it creates, that attaches to the enemy, whatever. When we see it in the culture all the time, anything that feels evil to somebody is Hitler. It's like, okay, everything's not Hitler, but okay. But that's just how the mind operates, right?
Yeah.
And so in this case, for whatever reason, because in the ayahuasca realm, it's kind of like you see a lot of light and fractal patterns, and you might call them spirits or entities.
I was literally my next question was going to be aliens. The entities. Yeah. Did you meet any entities?
Oh yeah. I mean, they're everywhere. Now, are those external, or are those just, in some sense, projections of my own consciousness? I don't think that's something that we can know.
No.
I think everybody interprets it in a different way. I don't know. So I'm just like, I don't know what this is, but it's something. I'm having this experience of this light being, or something's communicating with me, and I just go with it. But it's what ayahuasca really, it depends on the kind of ceremony you do, but the Shipibo ceremony that I was most interested in, it's really very similar to the work that I do, which is ayahuasca almost serves as an anesthetic, right? Which is kind of opens you up, right? And it detaches you from the ego self. So it puts you in this open state. And then the shamans chant these very specific kind of chants that have a vibration, a very strong vibration to them. you know, like that kind of heavy vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're doing, as I understand it, is that vibration is like clearing, cleaning, breaking up energetic blocks in your system. That's how that works. That's how they think about it, the Shipipo.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which is really what I'm doing in my
Yeah.
work, a different way, but they're going about it philosophically the same, but just a different way to go about it. But as you can imagine, just as my work is terrifying, like having those chants coming at you, this vibration, it's like the most terrifying experiences I've ever had have been during ayahuasca ceremonies. And even now, I mean, I've done like, I don't know, 60 ceremonies. It's like,
Wow.
there's certain people, shamans.
This isn't your first rodeo. Wow.
No.
I know it's kind of like asking a colorblind person to explain the color red, but is there any way that can you paint for the audience what these beings look like, or is it like I say, is it like asking a colorblind person to explain the color red?
It is, but I mean, what the most common thing that people see is a lot of fractal patterns,
Mm-hmm.
right? Light patterns and fractals, and so there's a lot of that, very colorful.
And how do you distinguish that from what seems like a being, an entity?
Well, that might be a being, right? That might be those could be beings,
okay.
Right? They're like,
so they almost feel like people.
Well, it depends. I mean, there's all different kinds. I've also had, very often I'll have like light, just light, like if I'm lying there and it feels like it's over top of my body, and this kind of, it's almost like I don't want to say it's a ship, but it's just these like this light, and they're shooting down like beams of light into my body, almost like they're doing some kind of surgery on me or something. And that has happened. And then I've experienced angels come to me, just like forms, right? And have had experiences with that. I've also had very dark entities come, and yeah, it manifests in all kinds of strange ways that, it's beyond description, but like things come, and people, everybody has different kind of vision. Some people see animals and snakes and jaguars, or they'll see like sort of kingdoms and cities of light.
Do you close your eyes for this ceremony? Are your eyes closed the whole time this is happening?
Generally, they don't have to be. I mean, sometimes you open your eyes, but for a lot of it, your eyes are closed, and you're just in your own world experiencing.
And if your eyes are open,
so it's all in your mind.
What does the world look like if your eyes are open?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're deep in the effect, like you can look around the room and see a lot of strange things. Generally, I know where I am. Like, I've never been so far gone that I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where I am. I mean, my sense of reality can be distorted. Like, I've very often opened my eyes and looked around and thought, this is some satanic ritual.
Yeah.
These people are evil. I need to get out of here, And then I'm like, I have to catch myself. So there's those kind of distortions that can happen, but it just very often has an intensity to it. But again, depending on the style of the ceremony, Shipibo ceremonies are very intense, and they're meant to really just kind of clean you out. But there's a lot of ceremonies that have very beautiful music. And so I think the intention of those ceremonies is like, you're going through this difficult experience, and or can be difficult, challenging maybe, and that there's music playing that is quite soothing. It's sort of more feminine style music, and it's almost like calling you back, calling you home. It's the thing that's like helping you through it. It's more like Pachamama, Mother Earth, like it's that feminine energy, and it's like holding you, and then eventually what happens is that you sort of dissolve into the music. Like, if you focus on the music and let yourself be taken over by the music, like something happens, and then you get into that vibration, and then you're just like, I've never experienced like a feeling of love and openness and like a unity consciousness, like the feeling of everything is one thing, and I'm connected to everything in the universe. And it's just that I've never had a stronger experience of that than I have in ayahuasca ceremonies. I mean, it's powerful. I mean, I don't know how you can come out of an ayahuasca ceremony and not believe in God, like some kind of God, like something. You're just like, what the fuck? What is that? There's something going on. My mind can't even comprehend, but something is so much bigger than me and smarter than me. I just gotta bow down. Like, I don't know what the fuck that was, but something. And then you just think, why is this here? And how did they discover it?
Also, why is
because it's a mix
illegal?
of, there's 80,000 plants in the jungle, in the Amazon jungle, and it's a combination of two very specific plants that make this brew. The odds of it happening spontaneously are, astronomical. So how did they even discover it? Well, what the shamans will say is that the plants told them, that they're communicating with the plants, which, if you think about it, if that's where if you live in the jungle all the time and you grew up in the jungle, you probably learn to sort of communicate with the plants and just in some way. And maybe there's ways that we can, now, obviously not in the way that you and I communicate with each other, but there's other ways. I mean, certainly, animals communicate with each other in plant. We know that plants communicate with each other through chemical signals and through the roots and also in ways that we don't yet understand, that essentially plants do have a kind of consciousness. Well, maybe that we can actually tune into that consciousness and there's information there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so interesting to me that, like you say, pretty much everyone who comes out of these experiences has a very similar experience. Maybe the actual way that experience manifests and the kind of things that they had to deal with, are different. But the general feeling and the general takeaway is very positive from everyone I've kind of watched, spoke to, heard from on things like ayahuasca, psilocybin, and it just makes you think, why is this stuff so sort of hidden from us, especially in the West? Right. And I think, upon a little bit of thought, it's actually quite obvious. And that's because, well, our whole culture is built on the telling the story. What's the story? Think very cognitively, think very intellectually. You don't want to feel your feelings. Here's TikTok all day. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Like, don't feel anything. So when you think about it, it's like, oh, this is why they made all of these things illegal, because there's very much a veil there within ourselves. If you want to take it big and talk on a broad consciousness level, there's a veil, and it needs to be lifted. This is why I wanted to interview you today, because it seems like you're a man who seems to know a lot about lifting that veil. So thank you so much for letting me pick your brain on all of this. I actually came across a book recently. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it was by a guy. His name's Merlin. I remembered his name is Merlin. I think it's Merlin like Sherwood or something. And I think he wrote a book on fungi. I wrote it down. Someone suggested the book to me. I'm going to suggest it to you, whether you read it or not. Take of it what you will. But I was told this is a very good book to read about what you just said about like the plants talking and, it's Merlin Sheldrake. Apparently he wrote a book. I think Russell Brand kind of pointed me in a similar direction of it. But it's meant to be fascinating. And he talks about exactly what you've just mentioned at the end there of ancient sort of tribes and things and the plants talking to them, which I'm sure many people have by now gone, well, this Christine girl is just an absolute kook, I'm unsubscribing. But if you are interested, then check it out. I'm definitely interested in this stuff. Look, whether it's woozy, floozy, whatever, I do think that there is a veil we pull over our eyes, and I do think that there's so much more that we don't know than what we do know.
I agree. Well said.
David, thank you so much for coming on my channel. It really does mean a lot to me. What's next for you? Where can the people find you? What are you up to?
I'm here in Austin, Texas, and my signature workshop is called Life Force Workshop, Unleash Your Life Force. And we do that every, 2 months or so, 10 weeks, and we have retreats. And I'm interviewing a lot more people on my YouTube channel. Like I interviewed Pearl and just trying to do what I essentially did with Tate. It's just gently probe them psychologically and So yeah, definitely check out my YouTube channel. I just interviewed the TikTok star Candy Ken, which was amazing. He's an amazing guy.
I saw some of that briefly on your Instagram.
Yeah, and he went. We actually did some work, and he hit, and he did. It was great. So yeah, I'm just trying to show more of what it is that I do to people, so they can just see it, and whether they come to a workshop or not, like at least they're exposed to the modality, so they can see that there's other ways of knowing, there's other ways of thinking, there's infinite possibilities, and that really more than anything, you can heal yourself. Like it's a thing, it's real. There's a way out of your suffering.
Absolutely, and through that we create a safer society. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And yeah, I definitely would say to the audience, if you don't already, if there's a lot of words in here that you thought, what are they on about? Shadow integration, all of this stuff. Like, what do you mean my unconscious? Please do go and check out David's Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and go check out his interviews as well. And hopefully eventually it will pique your curiosity to delve into these things, because it's interesting to watch people like Tate and Pearl get interviewed and probed away, but I can guarantee you there is nothing more interesting than having the bravery to probe away at yourself and see what you can find. And as I said, I'm an advocate for diving all the way in, jump into the abyss and come out with some gold. Don't just scratch away at the surface, but hey, that's my 2 pence for anyone who asked. Please do like this video on your way out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with this whole series in conversation with Christine. I've been talking to a bunch of different people, all people who fascinate me and have something interesting to talk about. If you have any suggestions for someone you think might be interesting, please do leave them in the comments below. And as I said, make sure you go check out all of David's platforms. I will attach the link in the description to his social media so you can go and find him and see what he's up to. And I will see you very soon in the next one.